Have you ever been told your whole life that you were second best? That no matter what you did, no matter how hard you worked, you were always going to be living in someone else's shadow? For me, that shadow was cast by my brother Peter, and for 35 years I lived in it. I accepted it. Until the day my own father reached out from beyond the grave to hand my brother a kingdom and leave me with a swamp. He thought he was leaving me with nothing. He had no idea he was leaving me with everything. My name is Sandra, and this is the story of how I turned a lifetime of being overlooked into my greatest weapon, and how a forgotten piece of history allowed me to take back not just my inheritance, but my entire life. It wasn't about revenge until it was. The air in the lawyer's office was thick with the scent of old paper and stale coffee, a smell I've associated with bad news ever since. I sat on a stiff leather chair that groaned every time I shifted my weight, the sound echoing the unease twisting in my gut. Across the mahogany desk, my brother Peter lounged in his chair, the picture of casual confidence. He'd already unbuttoned his suit jacket, a subtle display of someone who felt at home, someone who knew they belonged. I, on the other hand, felt like an imposter in my own family's history. Our mother sat between us, her hands clutching a designer handbag in her lap, her gaze fixed on a point somewhere over the lawyer's shoulder, a practiced look of neutral sorrow that she deployed at all family functions, from weddings to funerals. Mr. Abernethy, our family's lawyer for as long as I could remember, cleared his throat. He was a man made of tweed and soft platitudes, his face a roadmap of sympathetic wrinkles. He adjusted his spectacles and picked up the will, the crisp crackle of the paper silencing the room. "We are gathered today," he began, his voice a low, somber drone, "to execute the last will and testament of Richard Monroe Sterling, a great man, a titan of this county, and a loving father." I had to suppress a bitter laugh. Loving father. My father, Richard Sterling, was a man carved from the coastal granite his land sat on. He was powerful, charismatic, and had a gravitational pull that drew everyone into his orbit. But his light, like the sun's, did not shine on everyone equally. For Peter, his son and heir in all but name, it was a constant, warming glow. For me, it was a fleeting, conditional thing, something I had to earn and re-earn every single day. Peter was the golden child. He had our father's easy charm and our mother's good looks. Everything came effortlessly to him. He'd skated through school on a cloud of charisma, failed upwards in 2 business ventures that our father quietly bailed him out of, and was celebrated for simply existing. When Peter made the varsity football team, my father bought a billboard on the highway into town. When I graduated from my master's program with distinction, he patted me on the shoulder and asked if I'd remembered to pick up the dry cleaning. The injustice of it had been a constant, low-grade hum in the background of my life, a frequency I had learned to tune out just to survive. I had become the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who managed the family's rental properties, balanced the books for my father's smaller investments, and made sure our mother's prescriptions were filled. I was the family's scaffolding, essential but invisible, meant to be dismantled and forgotten once the main structure was complete. Mr. Abernethy continued, his voice pulling me from my thoughts. He droned on about some minor bequests, charitable donations, a trust for our mother's care, which I knew I would end up managing. I could feel Peter's impatience growing beside me. He tapped a polished loafer on the Persian rug, the rhythmic thud a countdown to his coronation. "And now," Abernethy said, his tone shifting to one of significance, "we come to the matter of the Sterling coastal properties." This was it. The Sterling land was the stuff of local legend. Generations of our family had held it. A sprawling, magnificent tract of coastline in Seacrest County. It was miles of pristine white sand beach, rolling dunes dotted with sea oats, and acres of pine forest. It was the crown jewel of our family's legacy, worth a fortune that was staggering to even contemplate. My father had loved that land more than anything, more than his wife, more than his children. It was his identity. "To my beloved son, Peter," Abernethy read. his voice resonating with patriarchal gravity. I bequeath the entirety of the Sterling beachfront properties, all parcels designated as oceanfront, including the main house, the dunes, and all associated timberlands. May he build a legacy upon it that will make the Sterling name proud for generations to come. Peter let out a slow, controlled breath, a sigh of victory he'd been holding in his whole life. He shot a glance at me, not of sympathy, but of pure, unadulterated triumph. It was a look that said, "Of course. Did you ever expect anything different?" Our mother reached over and squeezed his hand, her painted-on sorrow momentarily cracking to reveal a flicker of genuine pride. I felt the blood drain from my face. I expected it, of course I did. But hearing it spoken aloud, codified in the cold legal language of a will, felt like a physical blow. It was the final posthumous confirmation of what I had always known in my father's eyes. I was secondary, an afterthought. Mr. Abernethy coughed, a small awkward sound. "And to my daughter Sandra," he read, his voice now noticeably softer, almost apologetic. He couldn't even look at me. His eyes were fixed on the document, as if the words themselves were an embarrassment. "To my daughter Sandra, I bequeath the remaining inland parcels, the marshlands east of the highway, designated on the county map as undevelopable wetland preserve. I trust she will be a good steward of this conservation land." The marsh, the useless bug-infested brackish swamp that everyone in the family had always joked about. It was hundreds of acres of soggy, reeking mudflats and tangled mangroves, prone to flooding and accessible only by a crumbling service road. It was the land my father used to point to and laugh, saying it was the one bad bargain our great-great-grandfather ever made. Undevelopable, unusable, a conservation write-off. He hadn't just left me the scraps, he had left me a legally documented piece of trash. It wasn't a gift, it was a final dismissive wave of the hand, an insult carved in stone. The silence that followed was heavier than the lawyer's desk. Peter, to his credit, managed to feign a moment of surprise, a flicker of feigned pity crossing his features. "The marsh," he said, his voice dripping with faux concern. "Dad left you the marsh. Well, Sandy, I'm sure it's peaceful." He called me Sandy. He only ever called me Sandy when he was about to ask for something, or when he was being particularly condescending. Our mother finally looked at me, her expression one of resigned helplessness. "It's what your father wanted, dear," she murmured, as if that explained everything, as if the whims of a dead man were a holy scripture we couldn't question. It was her lifelong mantra, the phrase she used to justify every instance of neglect, every act of favoritism. "It's what your father wanted." I didn't say a word. I just stood up, the leather chair letting out a final mournful groan. I nodded once to Mr. Abernethy, my throat too tight to speak. I could feel Peter's smug gaze on my back as I walked out, the triumphant king of his sandcastle. I didn't look at him. I didn't look at my mother. I walked out of that office, past the portraits of stern-faced ancestors, and into the blinding sunlight, my inheritance clutched in my hand, a deed to a swamp and a lifetime of being told I was worthless. And in that moment, something inside me, something that had been dormant for decades, finally began to wake up. The hum of injustice I had lived with my whole life was no longer a background noise. It was a roar. The days that followed the will reading are a blur of hollow gestures and suffocating grief. Not grief for my father. Not really. That was a complicated, tangled knot I couldn't even begin to pick at. No, this was grief for myself. Grief for the little girl who tried so hard to win her father's approval, for the young woman who swallowed her pride and her pain time and time again, for the sake of family peace. I felt like a fool. I had played my part in the family play for so long, I'd forgotten the role was killing me. I holed up in my small apartment, a place I'd deliberately chosen on the other side of town to put a little distance between me and the gravitational pull of the family estate. The phone rang constantly. It was Peter, his voice booming with excitement, going on and on about his plans. He was going to build the most magnificent resort Seacrest County had ever seen. The Sterling Shores Grand Resort and Spa. It would have a 500-room hotel, 3 golf courses, a convention center, the works. He spoke as if it were already a done deal, as if the sheer force of his sterling birthright could will it into existence. "You won't believe the architects I'm talking to, Sandy," he'd say, the condescending nickname, a constant jab. "Top firms from New York. They say the beachfront is some of the best they've ever seen. A blank canvas." He never once asked how I was doing. He never acknowledged the brutal imbalance of the will. In his world, the natural order of things had simply been affirmed. The king had ascended the throne. The peasant had been sent to her hovel. In one call, he even had the audacity to say, "You know, I might need a bit of your swamp for overflow parking, or maybe some drainage runoff. We can work something out. I'll give you a fair price for it, don't you worry." A fair price for my swamp. The casual, unthinking cruelty of it stole my breath. He wasn't just the golden child. He was utterly oblivious to any reality but his own. I would hang up the phone, and my hands would be shaking, not with sadness anymore, but with a cold, clear rage that was terrifyingly new to me. My mother would call too, her voice fluttering with anxiety. "Peter is so ambitious, isn't he?" she'd chirp. "Your father would be so proud. Sandra, dear, you need to come for dinner. We shouldn't let this unpleasantness pull us apart." Unpleasantness. That's what she called it. The systematic, lifelong invalidation of her only daughter was just an inconvenient bit of unpleasantness, a wrinkle to be smoothed over before the family portrait was taken. Each phone call felt like a shovel of dirt being thrown on my own grave. I was being buried under the weight of their expectations, their delusions, their complete and utter dismissal of me as a person. That's when the flashbacks started hitting me, sharp and painful as shards of glass. It was my mind, I think, trying to make sense of the present by excavating the past, looking for the root of the rot. I remembered being 10 years old. I had spent a whole month working on a science fair project, a detailed model of the solar system with a tiny working motor that made the planets orbit a light bulb sun. I had gotten a blue ribbon, the first one ever from my elementary school at the state level. I ran home, clutching it in my hand, my heart fit to burst with pride. I found my father in the backyard, grilling steaks. Peter, who was 12, was lounging in a deck chair, bragging about hitting a home run in a meaningless scrimmage game. My father was beaming. "That's my boy," he'd boomed, clapping Peter on the back. "A natural slugger. We'll make a pro out of you yet." I held up my ribbon. "Dad, look. I won. I won the state science fair." He glanced at it, his eyes barely registering the blue silk. "Oh, that's nice, honey," he said, before turning back to the grill. "Now who wants the T-bone? Peter, this one's got your name on it." I remember standing there, the ribbon suddenly feeling cheap and silly in my hand, the smell of charred steak, and my father's indifference choking me. Another memory. I was 22, just graduated from college. I'd worked 2 jobs to get through, without any student loans, a fact I was immensely proud of. Peter, meanwhile, had just dropped out of his 3rd university, claiming the curriculum stifled his entrepreneurial spirit. He'd also managed to wreck his brand new convertible. That weekend, my father sat us both down. He slid a checkbook across the table to Peter. "This should cover the car, and give you some seed money for whatever you dream up next," he said warmly. Then he turned to me. "Sandra, I've been looking at the books for the marina tenants. They're a mess. I need you to go down there and sort it out. You've always been so good with the details." It wasn't a request, it was an assignment. Peter got seed money for his dreams. I got tasked with cleaning up the messes. The memories kept coming, a relentless tide of small and large humiliations. The time my parents flew to Europe to celebrate Peter's 25th birthday, and forgot that my graduation ceremony for my master's degree was the same weekend. The way my father would introduce us to his business associates. "This is my son, Peter. He's going to take over the world." Followed by, "And this is my daughter, Sandra. Just Sandra." No accolades, no ambitions, just my name, hanging in the air like a period at the end of Peter's sentence. I spent a week in this state of angry, helpless nostalgia. I stopped answering the phone. I let the messages pile up. I was drowning. My best friend, A sharp-witted lawyer named Chloe, who I'd known since college, was my only lifeline. She was the one person who had always seen the dynamic in my family for what it was. She was my voice of reason. "You know this is a blessing, right?" she told me over a video call, her face a mask of stern sympathy. I was huddled on my couch in a stained sweatshirt, probably looking like a wreck. "A blessing, Chloe. He gave me a swamp. It's a multi-million-dollar screw you from beyond the grave." "No, Sandra, he gave you an escape," she countered, her voice firm. "He severed the cord. You have no more obligations. You don't have to be the responsible one anymore. You don't have to clean up Peter's messes. You don't have to hope for a scrap of approval that was never going to come. You're free." Her words cut through the fog of my self-pity. Free. It was a terrifying thought. My entire identity had been built around my role in that family. Who was I without it? "What am I supposed to do with a swamp, Chloe?" I asked, my voice small. "Nothing," she said. "Let it be a swamp. Let Peter build his tacky resort. You, my friend, are going to take a vacation, and then you are going to block their numbers and start living your own damn life." It was good advice. It was sensible advice, and I almost took it. I was so close to just letting it all go, to walking away. That was my pattern, after all. Suffer the injustice, complain to Chloe, and then swallow it and move on. But then came the catalyst, the thing that changed everything. It happened on a rainy Saturday. I couldn't stand being in my apartment anymore, so I drove out to the old family house. Peter was there, of course, directing a team of surveyors who were planting little orange flags all over the pristine dunes. He was already scarring the land. I avoided him and went straight to the attic. My father had told me years ago to clear out my old childhood things, and in my usual dutiful way, I'd never gotten around to it. Now it felt like a final necessary chore. The attic was a dusty, forgotten world under the eaves. It smelled of cedar and thyme. Shafts of gray light cut through the grime on the dormer windows, illuminating dancing dust motes. It was filled with the ghosts of my family's past, old furniture shrouded in white sheets, like slumbering giants, boxes of my mother's old romance novels, Peter's broken sports trophies that were apparently still too precious to throw away. Tucked in a far corner, under a pile of moth-eaten wool blankets, was my father's old sea chest. It was a heavy, dark wood box with brass fittings, something he'd inherited from his own grandfather. He'd always been fascinated by maritime history, a passion he never shared with Peter, who found it boring, but one he'd occasionally indulge with me when I was a child. I ran my hand over the dusty lid. A sudden vivid memory surfaced. Me, about 8 years old, sitting on the floor right here, while my father showed me an old brittle map. He was in a rare quiet mood that day. "This is our history, Sandra," he had said, his voice softer than I was used to. "Not just ours, the county's. People forget what this coast used to be." We had spent an hour looking at it, his finger tracing lines that meant nothing to me at the time. He'd folded it carefully and put it back in the chest, and I hadn't thought of it since. On a whim, driven by a strange pulse of nostalgia, I lifted the heavy lid. The chest was mostly full of old nautical charts and books on shipbuilding, but there, at the bottom, lying flat beneath a collection of antique compasses, was a rolled-up tube of vellum, tied with a faded red ribbon. I untied it. My hands trembled as I carefully unrolled it on the dusty floor. It was the map. It was even older and more beautiful than I remembered. The ink was faded, the vellum yellowed and cracked at the edges, but it was all there. It was hand-drawn, with elegant spidery calligraphy, and a beautiful compass rose in the corner. The title, written in ornate Spanish script, read Canal de San Marcos, 1682, the Channel of St. Mark. My Spanish was rusty, but I could make out the words. It was a Spanish shipping map, a survey of the coastline, commissioned by some long-forgotten governor of colonial Florida. It showed depths and currents, safe anchorages, and treacherous shoals. And then I saw it. My heart didn't just stop. It felt like it rebooted. There, running straight through the landmass, labeled Ciénaga Grande, the Great Swamp, was a dark, thick blue line. It snaked its way from the deep ocean, through the outer sandbars, and cut a clear, deep channel right through the heart of the marsh, ending in a wide, protected basin. The notation next to it read, Porto Seguro, a safe harbor, with a depth marking that even to my untrained eye looked significant. I stared at the map, my mind racing, connecting dots that had been scattered for decades. My father's words from all those years ago echoed in my ears. People forget what this coast used to be. Peter's smug dismissal, the lawyer's pitying look, the deed to my unusable marshland. I suddenly scrambled to my feet, the map clutched in my hand like a holy relic. I ran out of the attic, past a startled Peter who was shouting something at me about trespassing, and got into my car. My mind was on fire. I didn't know all the details yet. I didn't know the legal ramifications, but I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that this piece of paper changed everything. My father, in his infinite, arrogant ignorance, had thought he was giving me a swamp. He had no idea he had just handed me the keys to the entire coast. He inherited the land, but I had just inherited our history, and I was going to use it. The grief was gone. The helplessness was gone. In their place was a feeling so sharp and clear it was almost painful. Resolve. The drive back to my apartment was a blur. The old map sat on the passenger seat, a fragile, explosive secret. My first instinct was to call Chloe, my lawyer friend, but I knew this was something more specialized. This wasn't just law, this was history, and I knew exactly who to call. Arthur Pendleton was a local legend, a retired maritime historian and cartographer, who had been a friend of my father's back in the day. Their friendship had cooled years ago over some vague business disagreement I was never privy to, but Arthur had always been kind to me. He saw me as a fellow quiet soul in a family of loud noises. He lived in a cluttered little bungalow by the Intracoastal Waterway, a house that was more library than living space. I called him, my voice tight with urgency. Arthur, it's Sandra Sterling. I need to show you something. It's old. He must have heard the strange mix of panic and excitement in my voice, because he just said, "Come on over, Sandra, the kettle's on." An hour later, I was sitting at his kitchen table, which was buried under stacks of books and nautical charts. Arthur, a man with a wild mane of white hair and eyes that twinkled with keen intelligence, peered at the Spanish map through a large magnifying glass. The silence in the room stretched on, broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock and the gurgle of a nearby fish tank. I held my breath. Finally, he looked up, his eyes wide. He took off his glasses and rubbed his face, a gesture of pure astonishment. "My God, Sandra," he whispered. "Do you have any idea what this is?" "I have a feeling it's important," I said, my voice barely a squeak. "Important?" He let out a short, barking laugh. "My dear girl, this is the holy grail of Seacrest County history. This is the Canal de San Marcos. It's been a local legend for centuries. Most historians thought it was a myth, a tall tale told by old sailors, a deep water channel that ran through the great marsh. Everyone said it was impossible, that it must have silted up and vanished hundreds of years ago." He leaned in closer, his excitement palpable. "But this is a primary source document, a 17th century Spanish colonial survey. This isn't a story, it's proof. This map proves that a deep water channel, a natural navigable port, historically existed right in the middle of your marsh." The word hung in the air between us. My marsh, my useless, worthless swamp. "What does it mean, Arthur?" I asked, my heart pounding against my ribs. "Legally, what does this mean?" This is where Arthur's eyes got a dangerous glint. The old falling out with my father, whatever it was, seemed to surface in his memory. "It means," he said slowly, choosing his words with deliberate care, "that your brother has a very, very big problem. You see, our county's Coastal Development Board has notoriously strict zoning laws. They're run by a bunch of old money preservationists who hate new development. Their favorite reason for denying permits, especially for anything as big as a resort, is a lack of historical precedent." He tapped a finger on the map. "Your brother wants to build a massive hotel on a pristine beach. There is no historical precedent for that. It's a fragile dune system, The board will eat him alive with environmental impact studies and conservation protests. But a marina? A port? He smiled, a slow, wolfish grin. A port is different, especially if you can prove that a port historically existed in that exact location. This map isn't just a piece of paper, Sandra. It's a golden ticket. It's a legal argument that bypasses almost all of their modern objections. It establishes a historical use for the land that predates every single one of their zoning regulations. I stared at him, the full implication of his words washing over me. So Peter's resort, dead in the water, Arthur finished for me. The pun clearly intentional. He can't get the permits. Not for what he wants to build. Not without access to a deep water channel for a marina, which is always part of these big resort packages. It's where the rich guys park their yachts. And the only documented, historically defensible, legally sound place to build a marina in this entire godforsaken county. He pointed a triumphant, gnarled finger right at the center of the map. Is sitting right in the middle of your swamp. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of it all settling in. It wasn't just a trump card, it was the whole deck. My inheritance wasn't the useless land. My inheritance was the only key that could unlock the value of Peter's land. One was worthless without the other. My father, in his final act of dismissive arrogance, had accidentally split the treasure from the key, and he'd given the key to me. It was poetic. It was perfect. What was the disagreement you had with my father? I asked quietly, sensing it was important. Arthur's smile faded. He looked out the window at the water. It was a long time ago. We were going to go in on a small boat-building business together. A passion project. I had the skills, he had the capital. At the last minute he backed out, said it wasn't a big enough splash. He invested in some flashy real estate developer from out of state instead. The guy went bankrupt a year later and took your father's money with him. Richard never admitted he made a mistake. He just stopped calling. He valued appearance over substance, Sandra. Always did. He looked back at me, his eyes clear. Your brother is his father's son. He'll make the same mistakes. It was all I needed to hear. This wasn't just about my vindication anymore. It was about Arthur's too. I need a lawyer, I said, my voice firm now. A good one, not Abernathy. Someone who understands land use and isn't afraid of a fight. I know just the person, Arthur said, already reaching for his Rolodex. But first we need to do this right, quietly. We need to authenticate this map with the state archives. We need to get a hydrographic survey of the marsh to prove the channel is still there, even if it's filled with silt. We need to build an ironclad case before your brother even knows what's happening. He's all noise and fury, Sandra. We need to be silent and methodical. We need to be the water that wears down the stone. The next 2 months were a masterclass in clandestine operations. It was the most alive I'd ever felt. The project gave me a purpose that was entirely my own. It wasn't about pleasing my father, or managing my mother, or propping up my brother. It was for me. My new lawyer, a woman named Eleanor Vance, who had a reputation for being a shark in a sensible pantsuit, was brilliant. She was everything Abernathy wasn't: sharp, aggressive, and utterly unimpressed by the sterling name. When I laid the map out on her conference table, and Arthur explained its significance, she didn't just smile, she laughed. A low, appreciative, predatory laugh. "Oh, this is beautiful," she said, circling the table like a predator sizing up its prey. "This is the kind of case I live for." We worked in secret. Arthur used his academic contacts to get the map authenticated by a panel of experts at the State University. Their report came back glowing. It was a genuine, priceless artifact of colonial history. Eleanor, meanwhile, hired a discreet geological survey team, friends of hers from out of state. Under the guise of a university-funded wetland conservation study, a beautiful piece of irony, they spent a week in my marsh. They used ground-penetrating radar and took core samples. I'll never forget the day Eleanor called me with the results. "You're not going to believe this, Sandra," she said, and I could hear the excitement crackling through the phone. "The channel is there. It's filled with centuries of mud and silt, but the deep bedrock cut is perfectly preserved. It's exactly where the map says it is. A geological survey and a dredger could open it back up in 6 months. I felt a dizzying surge of power. It was real. It was all real. While I was quietly assembling my arsenal, Peter was loudly marching towards his own doom. As Arthur had predicted, the Seacrest County Planning and Zoning Board was giving him hell. His initial application for the Sterling Shores Grand Resort was met with a flood of objections. The local Audubon Society protested the impact on nesting shorebirds. A coastal preservation group raised concerns about dune erosion. The board itself, led by a formidable old woman named Mildred Carmichael, who considered all new construction a personal affront, buried his project in requests for more studies, more reports, more everything. Peter was incandescent with rage. He'd call me not for advice, but to vent. Can you believe these people, Sandy? These bureaucratic fossils, they don't understand progress. They don't understand the vision. This is my birthright. I would listen patiently on the other end of the line, making sympathetic noises. Oh, that sounds so frustrating, Peter, I'd say, my voice dripping with feigned sincerity. Is there anything I can do? What could you do? He'd scoff. Unless your swamp has magical powers, you're no help to me. Oh, Peter, I'd think to myself as I hung up the phone, you have no idea. The subplot with Arthur added another layer to my motivation. He wasn't just an ally, he was a living reminder of my father's, and by extension Peter's fatal flaw, prioritizing flash over substance, dismissing quiet competence in favor of loud confidence. Arthur's quiet vindication became intertwined with my own. He'd spend hours with me, poring over old county records in the dusty basement of the courthouse, teaching me how to read the faded script of 19th century deeds. We discovered that my marshland had been specifically excluded from certain modern environmental easements precisely because of its historical maritime classification, a forgotten footnote in a 1920s zoning code that no one had bothered to look at for a century. It was another brick in our fortress. Each discovery felt like a small victory, a quiet act of rebellion against the family narrative. I wasn't just the swamp girl anymore. I was becoming an expert in my own right, an archaeologist of my family's and my county's secrets. And the most important secret of all was the one I was about to deploy. The first move was a silent one, a whisper in the right ear. Eleanor Vance, my lawyer, happened to be on a charity board with none other than Mildred Carmichael, the dragon lady head of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Over a plate of lukewarm chicken at a fundraising luncheon, Eleanor casually mentioned her new fascinating pro bono case for a local landowner. It's a historical preservation issue, Eleanor said, her voice a perfect blend of academic curiosity and legal diligence. We've uncovered a 17th century Spanish chart that suggests a significant state-recognized historical site might be located adjacent to that proposed Sterling resort. We're still in the preliminary stages of our research, of course. We wouldn't want to make a formal claim until we're absolutely certain, but the implications for any large-scale development in that area could be substantial. She didn't mention me, she didn't mention the marsh, she didn't mention a marina. She just planted a seed of doubt, a perfectly crafted, legally ambiguous grenade, and walked away. 2 weeks later, the bomb went off. Peter called me, and for the first time in his life, he didn't sound smug or angry. He sounded panicked. They denied them, Sandy, he stammered, his voice thin and reedy. They denied the permits, all of them, flat out denied. I feigned shock. What, Peter, why? I thought it was just a matter of more studies. I don't know, something about a potential conflict with an undocumented historical site. Some nonsense about needing a full archaeological survey of the entire coastline before any new construction can be considered. A survey that could take years and cost a fortune. His voice cracked on the last word. They said there was a lack of historical precedent for a resort of this scale. They used those exact words. I had to grip the edge of my kitchen counter to keep my hand from shaking, not with fear, but with a surge of triumphant adrenaline. It was working. It was all working exactly as planned. A historical site, I asked, playing dumb. Where? What kind of site? They don't know. That's the crazy part. It's all just rumors and whispers. Mildred Carmichael looked at me in that meeting like I was personally trying to bulldoze a cathedral. Someone must be behind this. Someone is sabotaging me. I could hear the paranoia creeping into his voice. He was a man who had never faced a real obstacle in his life, and now that he had, he couldn't comprehend it. It had to be a conspiracy. It couldn't possibly be the result of his own arrogance and lack of due diligence. The next few weeks were a slow-motion car crash. Peter's grand vision for the Sterling Shores Grand Resort and Spa began to crumble. He had already sunk a tremendous amount of capital into the project, paying exorbitant fees to the New York architects, hiring a PR firm, and retaining a team of high-priced lawyers from the city, who had assured him that bulldozing the local yokels on the planning board would be a slam dunk. Now those bills were coming due, and he had nothing to show for it but a set of useless blueprints and a flat denial from the county. His panic escalated, and with it, his condescension toward me took on a new, desperate edge. He called me again a week later, his tone shifting from panic to predatory. "Look, Sandy," he said, trying to sound casual. "I've been thinking about your plot of land." "My swamp?" I asked sweetly. "Yes, your marsh," he corrected himself, the word swamp now tasting sour in his own mouth. "The thing is, my engineers think that even if we get past this historical nonsense, we're going to have a major problem with drainage from the golf courses. The only logical place for the runoff to go is into your property. It would be a huge help to me." "Here it comes," I thought, "the low ball offer. I'm willing to take it off your hands," he continued, the magnanimous king offering a pittance to a peasant. "I know Dad left it to you, and it probably has sentimental value or whatever, but let's be honest, it's a liability, it's undevelopable. I'll give you $50,000 for the whole parcel, cash. That's more than fair. It's more than anyone else would ever pay you for a mosquito farm. $50,000 for land that held the key to a 9-figure development." I almost laughed out loud. The sheer breathtaking arrogance of it was a thing to behold. He wasn't just trying to buy my land, he was trying to reinforce my place in the family hierarchy. He was reminding me that he was the one who determined value, and I was the one who should be grateful for any crumbs he chose to bestow. "I don't know, Peter," I said, letting a note of hesitation enter my voice. "50,000 seems low, even for a swamp." He scoffed, a short, ugly sound. "Don't be ridiculous, Sandra. Don't get greedy. This is the best offer you're ever going to get. It's that, or you can keep it and pay property taxes on a mud puddle for the rest of your life. Your choice." "I'll have to think about it," I said softly. "Don't think too long," he snapped, his desperation fraying the edges of his smooth demeanor. "The offer's not going to be on the table forever." He hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, and a slow, wide smile spread across my face. It wasn't just about the land anymore. It wasn't about the money. It was about this moment. The moment when the golden child, the king of the sandcastle, started to realize that the tide was coming in, and the one person who could offer him a lifeline was the sister he had dismissed his entire life. He thought he was negotiating from a position of power. He had no idea he was already drowning. My silent refusal to sell, my simple "I'll think about it," was an act of defiance so foreign to our family dynamic that it sent shockwaves through their little ecosystem. For Peter, my lack of immediate, grateful compliance was incomprehensible. It was as if a household appliance had suddenly started refusing to work. He didn't know what to do, so he did what he always did when faced with a problem he couldn't charm or bully his way through. He went running to our mother, and that's when the real manipulation began. My mother called me that evening, her voice a strained, trembling thing. "Sandra, darling, I just had Peter on the phone. He was very upset." "I'm sure he was," I said calmly, picturing him pacing in the grand living room of the main house, a room I hadn't set foot in since the funeral. "He told me he made you a very generous offer for that marshland, and you turned him down." Her tone was accusatory, as if I had committed some unspeakable betrayal. "I didn't turn him down, Mother. I told him I needed to think about it." "Think about it," she chirped, a sound like cracking ice. "What is there to think about? Sandra, your brother is trying to build a legacy for this family, for the Sterling name. It's what your father would have wanted, and you're holding it up over a patch of mud. He needs that land. It's for the good of the family. The good of the family. The phrase that had been the cage I'd lived in my entire life. It never meant the good of the whole family. It always meant the good of Peter. "It's my land, Mother," I said, my voice quiet but firm. It was the first time I had ever said anything like that to her. The first time I had ever drawn a boundary. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Don't you take that tone with me," she snapped, the velvet glove coming off to reveal the iron fist beneath. "After everything this family has given you, what has this family given me?" The question popped out before I could stop it. It was a raw, honest question, and it hung in the air between us, shocking both of us into silence. She recovered first. "It has given you everything," she said, her voice dripping with indignation. "A roof over your head, a name to be proud of. And now you're going to be selfish? You're going to let your jealousy of your brother tear this family apart, all because because the will wasn't exactly what you hoped for. Jealousy." They thought this was about jealousy. They were so blinded by their own narrative that they couldn't imagine any other motivation. They couldn't conceive that I might have my own plans, my own power, my own worth. In their eyes, I could only exist in relation to Peter, either as his helper or his jealous rival. The idea of me as an independent actor was literally unthinkable to them. "This isn't about jealousy, Mother," I said, my newfound resolve holding steady. "This is about business, and Peter's offer was not a good business decision for me." "Business?" She laughed, a brittle, ugly sound. "What do you know about business? You're a bookkeeper. Your brother is the visionary. You are being petty and vindictive, and your father would be ashamed of you." There it was, the ultimate weapon in her arsenal, the ghost of my father summoned to cast judgment. For years that would have shattered me. It would have sent me scurrying back into my box, desperate to regain their approval, but not anymore. The map had changed me. Arthur and Eleanor had changed me. I had changed myself. "Well," I said, my voice as cold and clear as ice water, "he's not here to be ashamed, is he? And the land is in my name. I'll be in touch when I've made my decision." I hung up the phone before she could reply. My heart was hammering, but I felt a strange sense of exhilaration. I had done it. I had stood up to her. I had survived the guilt trip. The family's primary weapon of control had been fired, and it had bounced right off my armor. The fallout was immediate. This was the beginning of what I now call the family exodus. It wasn't a dramatic walkout. It was more like a quiet, strategic retreat. My aunts, uncles, and cousins, who had all been singing Peter's praises and jockeying for a place in his new resort-fueled kingdom, suddenly went quiet. They had heard the whispers. They knew Peter's permits were denied. They knew he was financially overextended. And now they heard that I, the quiet, reliable Sandra, was refusing to play ball. They started calling me, not my mother or Peter. My cousin Sarah, who was a real estate agent, called under the guise of just checking in. After 10 minutes of pleasantries, she got to the point. "So, I heard Peter's having some trouble with the planning board," she said casually. "Is it true you're holding on to the marsh?" "I'm evaluating my options for the property," I said using the non-committal language Eleanor had taught me. Right. Smart," she said quickly. "You know, if you ever do decide to develop it, my firm has a lot of experience with commercial zoning." The rats were beginning to sense a shift in the direction of the ship. They weren't leaving it yet, but they were definitely hedging their bets. They were moving away from Peter's sinking vessel and inching closer to my strange, unknown little lifeboat. They didn't know what I had, but they knew it was something. Peter's power was based on a future promise, and that future was suddenly in doubt. My power, whatever it was in the present. It was real. Peter, feeling his support network crumble and his financial situation growing more precarious by the day, made one last, desperate move. He showed up at my apartment, unannounced. It was late, after 9 at night. The loud, insistent banging on my door made me jump. I looked through the peephole and saw him standing there, his face pale and slick with sweat under the hallway lights. He looked diminished. The golden boy glow was gone. I opened the door but blocked the entrance with my body. "Peter, it's late. I need to talk to you," he said, his voice raw. He tried to push past me, but I stood my ground. "We can talk right here." He looked stunned. He had never been denied entry anywhere, least of all by me. He took a step back, running a hand through his usually perfect hair, leaving it disheveled. "What do you want, Sandra?" he asked, his voice a mix of pleading and fury. "What is this? Are you trying to punish me? Punish Dad? Is that it? You want more money? Fine, 100,000. That's my final offer. Take it." He was trying to regain control, to turn this back into a simple transaction where he held all the cards, but his desperation was a stench I could smell from across the threshold. "It's not about the money, Peter," I said calmly. "Then what is it about?" he yelled, his voice echoing in the quiet hallway. A neighbor's door opened a crack, and then quickly shut. "What could you possibly do with a swamp? What is your game?" I looked at him, at this man who had been the sun in my family's solar system for as long as I could remember. I saw the fear in his eyes, the terror of a king who was about to lose his kingdom, and I realized something. It wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about balance. It was about correcting a scale that had been tipped unfairly for 35 years. It was about showing him, and my mother, and the ghost of my father, what my true value was. "I don't have a game, Peter," I said, and for the first time, I felt a genuine flicker of pity for him. He was a child, trapped in a man's body, who had just been told he couldn't have the toy he wanted. "I'm just doing what Dad taught us to do." "What are you talking about?" he asked, confused. "I'm building a legacy," I said softly. "One that will make the Sterling name proud for generations to come." I used the exact words from the will, the words that had been meant for him. I saw the recognition, and then the dawning horror, in his eyes. He finally understood that this wasn't about a grudge. This was about a takeover. And it was already in motion. I gave him 2 weeks. 2 weeks of silence. I let him stew in his own panic and mounting debt. I let him call my mother, who in turn left me a series of increasingly hysterical voicemails that I calmly deleted without listening to. I let our extended family gossip and speculate. I let the pressure build. Eleanor Vance, my lawyer, called it the softening up period. I called it giving him enough rope to hang himself with. During those 2 weeks, we weren't idle. Eleanor filed our preliminary application with the Seacrest County Planning and Zoning Board. It wasn't a huge, flashy proposal like Peter's. It was a modest, impeccably researched plan for the Canal de San Marcos historic port and marina. It was filled with historical appendices, including the certified authentication of the Spanish map. It had the full geological survey, proving the existence of the channel. It had letters of support from the State Historical Society and a dozen maritime preservation groups that Arthur had cultivated. It was a masterpiece of legal and political strategy. It framed the project not as a new development, but as a historic restoration, a reclamation of the county's proud maritime past. We weren't asking to build something new. We were asking to restore something old. It was a narrative that the preservationist-minded board couldn't resist. Mildred Carmichael herself, after reviewing our submission, was said to have called it the most responsible and respectful development proposal this county has seen in 50 years. The confrontation, when it came, wasn't at my apartment. It was on my terms. I had Eleanor send a formal letter to Peter's lawyer, inviting them to a meeting at her office to discuss a matter of mutual interest regarding adjacent properties. It was a cold corporate summons, and it was designed to put him on the back foot. He was no longer the king summoning a vassal. He was a petitioner being granted an audience. He arrived with his lawyer, a slick city attorney, who looked deeply uncomfortable in our sleepy coastal town. Peter looked terrible. He'd lost weight. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his expensive suit looked like it was wearing him, not the other way around. He walked into the conference room with a defensive, wounded swagger, a deposed monarch still trying to project authority he no longer had. I was already there, sitting at the head of the table with Eleanor and Arthur. Arthur had insisted on coming. "I want to see the look on that boy's face," he'd said, with a grim smile. "Sandra," Peter began, his voice attempting a tone of weary reasonableness, "I hope we can put an end to this family drama. My lawyer advises me that your refusal to sell is bordering on tortious interference with my business." His lawyer winced. It was a weak, desperate threat, and we all knew it. Eleanor just smiled. She didn't say a word. She simply slid a thick, spiral-bound document across the polished table towards them. On the cover in bold letters it read, "Preliminary approval, the Canal de San Marcos Historic Port and Marina, Seacrest County Planning and Zoning Board." Peter stared at it. He blinked, as if he couldn't quite process the words. He slowly opened the cover. Inside was a copy of our approved application. He saw the site plans, the architectural renderings of a tasteful, high-end marina with a small yacht club and a maritime museum. He saw the geological surveys. He saw the letters of support. And then on the third page he saw it, a high-resolution, full-color reproduction of the 17th-century Spanish map. The Canal de San Marcos. The Puerto Seguro. He looked up from the document, his face ashen. He looked at me, and for the first time, he wasn't looking at his little sister, the family bookkeeper, the girl he called Sandy. He was looking at a stranger, someone he didn't know at all. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "That," I said, my voice perfectly level, "is the new reality. That is the historical precedent the board was looking for. It turns out my land isn't a swamp, Peter. It's the only historically documented deep-water port in the entire county. The only place a marina can legally be built. Which means the only way your beachfront property has any value for the kind of resort you want to build is through me." The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the blood draining from Peter's face. His lawyer was flipping through the document, his expression shifting from confusion to shock to a kind of grudging professional admiration. He knew, he understood the checkmate. "Your grand resort is impossible without a marina," I continued, laying out the facts as calmly as if I were balancing a ledger. "The high net worth clients you want to attract aren't coming if they can't park their yachts. And they can't park their yachts on the beach. They need a deep water channel. My channel." I leaned forward slightly. "So you have two options. Option A, you can continue to sit on your beautiful, pristine, and now practically worthless beachfront property. You can fight the zoning board for the next 10 years and go bankrupt paying your lawyers. Or there's option B." He stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. "Option B," I said, "is that you sell me your land, all of it. The beachfront, the dunes, the timberlands, everything Dad left you." His lawyer let out an incredulous bark of a laugh. "That's absurd. That land is worth a fortune." "It was worth a fortune," Arthur interjected, his voice dry as dust, "when it had development potential. Right now, it's a very pretty, very expensive nature preserve. Its market value has plummeted. But we're prepared to make a fair offer." Eleanor slid another, much slimmer folder across the table. "This is a certified appraisal of the land's current market value, given the new zoning realities," she said. "We're prepared to offer you exactly that much, not a penny more." Peter opened the folder. I watched his face as he saw the number. The number wasn't an insult. It was fair based on the new circumstances, but it was a fraction, a tiny fraction of what he had believed his inheritance was worth. It was enough to cover his debts, and maybe leave him with a little to start over. But it wasn't a kingdom, it was a parachute. "You can't do this," he stammered, looking at me. It wasn't a threat, it was a plea. He was appealing to the old Sandra, the one who would have fixed this for him. "I already have," I said. The words were cold, but I didn't feel cold. I felt balanced. "This isn't a negotiation, Peter. This is the new reality. My marina is getting built. The only question is whether it will have a world-class resort next to it, or if it will just be a very exclusive, very private port. Your land, my terms. You have 72 hours to accept the offer." I stood up. Arthur and Eleanor stood with me. I looked at my brother, my shell-shocked, defeated brother, and I felt nothing but a quiet, calm finality. The charade was over. The family play had reached its final act. The invisible scaffolding had just revealed that it was, in fact, the entire foundation. He inherited the land, I thought, but I inherited the power. Peter took the deal. Of course he did. He had no choice. The banks were calling. His architects were suing him for non-payment. And his pride, while immense, wasn't enough to withstand the crushing reality of total financial ruin. He signed the papers in his lawyer's office, not mine. I was told he didn't say a word, just signed his name with a hand that trembled slightly, transferring the sterling kingdom to me for a price that was fair, but felt to him like an insult. The news of the sale sent a quiet earthquake through our community. The story that got out, the one I carefully cultivated, was a simple and elegant one, that the two sterling heirs had decided to pool their resources, combining their inherited lands for a new, more historically sensitive project. It was a narrative of family unity, a story that preserved the sterling name on the surface, which I knew was the only thing my mother truly cared about. She could still hold her head up at the country club. She chose to believe that lie, because the truth that her daughter had systematically dismantled her son's legacy was too much for her to bear. We never spoke of it again. We barely spoke at all. Our relationship became one of polite, hollow pleasantries, exchanged at holidays, a fragile truce built on a foundation of things left unsaid. As for Peter, he left town. He took the money from the sale, which was enough to settle his debts and leave him with a modest nest egg, and he moved to Florida. I hear he's selling timeshares now. He, who was supposed to build a grand resort, now sells weekly shares in someone else's. The irony is not lost on me. He sends a generic Christmas card every year. There's never a personal note. And me? I built the marina. I did it my way, with Arthur as my senior advisor, and a team I chose myself. We dredged the Canal de San Marcos, and it was just as deep and perfect as the old Spanish map had promised. It felt like uncovering a secret artery to the sea, a piece of history brought back to life. The marina is beautiful, it's tasteful, it's successful, and it's mine. I named the main pier after Arthur. I kept the main house, my father's house, and I live there now. Sometimes, I sit on the porch in the evening, looking out over the land, all of it, the beach and the marsh, and I feel a sense of peace I never thought possible. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the dismissal. It was about a lifetime of being told I was less than. My father's will was meant to be the final word on my value, a final judgment, but he made a mistake. He assumed the land's worth was in the obvious, the visible, the beachfront. He overlooked the hidden potential, the history buried in the mud. He overlooked me, and his oversight became my opportunity. I didn't tear down his legacy. In a way, I fulfilled it. I just put the right person in charge. So why am I telling you all this? Because I think there's a little bit of my story in a lot of people's lives. Maybe you're the one in your family who is always expected to be the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who cleans up the messes. Maybe you've been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. You're the scaffolding for someone else's grand design, and you're starting to wonder when it's your turn to build something for yourself. What I learned is that sometimes, your greatest strength is hidden in the very thing people dismiss about you. My unusable marsh, my worthless inheritance, was my power, my quiet, detail-oriented nature. The very thing that made my father see me as a bookkeeper instead of a visionary, was what allowed me to uncover the truth and build my case. Your perceived weaknesses can be your greatest weapons, if you learn how to wield them. Don't wait for someone to hand you your value. Go out and find it. Dig for it. It might be buried in an old map, or a forgotten skill, or just in the quiet resolve to say, no more. The moment you stop seeking approval from the people who will never give it, is the moment you become free. Thanks for listening to my story. If you've ever felt like the underdog in your own family, I'd love to hear about your experience in the comments below. What was the moment you realized you had to draw a line in the sand? And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about turning the tables and finding your own power. You are worth more than they told you. Go prove it.